Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take stacks of complicated, often conflicting, source material articles, investigations, proprietary documents, and synthesize them into the clear, actionable knowledge you need.
And today we are really peering through the lens of one of the world's most powerful, most secretive, and I think you could argue most controversial data firms.
We're talking about Palantir Technologies.
Exactly. This is a necessary deep dive because, Palantir doesn't operate in the consumer space. You can't download a Palantir app.
Right.
They are deeply, deeply embedded in the mechanics of modern government. We've compiled investigations covering everything from national intelligence and counterterrorism to, to global health platforms and local police tactics.
This company really does sit right at that nexus of state power and your personal data.
It does.
So our mission today is, I think, pretty straightforward. We're synthesizing these complex sources to really get the real story behind Palantir. We need to dissect its controversial contracts, examine how it manages this fascinating dual identity.
It really is a dual identity.
Claiming to champion privacy, while at the same time facilitating these massive systems of state surveillance. And crucially, we have to wrestle with the ethical and political footprint left by its high-profile founders.
And that deep dive starts right with the name itself. I mean, it's perhaps the most explicit acknowledgement of their ambition you will ever find. Palantir.
It's from the Lord of the Rings.
It is. It's named after the mystical seeing stones or orbs from J.R.R. Tolkien's work.
The Palantiri, they allowed the user to see across vast distances, communicate telepathically, see things they weren't supposed to see.
Exactly. It's a perfect, almost arrogant metaphor for a company whose central goal is to pull, analyze, and link vast sensitive data streams from totally incompatible sources.
Giving the user,
be it the CIA, the New Orleans Police Department, or the UK's National Health Service. A perfect, high-resolution view of reality. It's an explicit acknowledgement of the all-seeing power they are trying to create.
Okay, so let's unpack this secretive core. Because Palantir didn't start like most Silicon Valley companies, with an angel investor and a product for consumers. Where did that initial focus, and crucially, the initial money come from?
The origins are absolutely foundational to understanding their mission and their enduring identity. Palantir was founded with seed money from a firm called In-Q-Tel.
And for anyone unfamiliar, In-Q-Tel is, it's not your typical VC firm.
No, it's a nonprofit venture capital firm that serves as the strategic link between the U.S. intelligence community, primarily the CIA, and the tech startup world.
So their very first client, their first investor, really, was the intelligence community. That sets the tone immediately.
Precisely. This foundational relationship immediately cemented Palantir's focus on defense, on signals intelligence, and large-scale government data processing. It wasn't built for social networking or e-commerce.
No.
It was built, as one of our sources notes, for signals intelligence operations carried out by the security services. And that DNA, that core identity, has never really changed, even as they've expanded into healthcare and logistics.
And the people leading it are just fascinating because they seem to embody this inherent, almost existential contradiction. You have co-founder Peter Thiel, who's probably the best-known public face of the company.
Right, a major shareholder and a highly controversial political figure.
Thiel's involvement brings a unique philosophical baggage. He's not just a major Republican donor. His philosophical views actively question the core tenets of modern governance.
He's a noted libertarian who once famously wrote that the vast increase in welfare beneficiaries and the extension of the franchise to women have rendered the notion of capitalist democracy into an oxymoron.
That is a profoundly anti-democratic stance for someone whose company is actively trying to become the operating system that runs those very democratic governments. How does that philosophy even square structurally with the company's stated commitments?
That is the central paradox. It's the question at the heart of the company. Palantir argues that technology is inherently neutral, and they are simply providing the best tools available.
But you have to contrast Thiel with the CEO, Alex Karp.
You do. And our sources describe Karp as having a progressive academic background. He holds a PhD in neoclassical social theory. And critically, our sources suggest it was Karp who, from the very beginning, insisted on building privacy and civil liberties safeguards into Palantir's products.
Safeguards like what, specifically?
Specifically, things like detailed audit functions and granular access controls.
So the company attempts to check its own power almost preemptively through the technical design of the software itself.
That's the official narrative. It's their major selling point. They present themselves as having this core commitment to the preservation of privacy, and they use these audit functions as the proof.
The idea being that the software logs every single user interaction.
Every search, every query, every data export, it hypothetically acts as a constant check on misuse. But the efficacy of this check is, well, it's highly debatable, especially when you have government clients operating under immense pressure.
I remember that anecdote in the sources about the government client who looked up his ex-girlfriend.
Yes.
It really illustrates the gap between the philosophical intent and the practical application of these safeguards.
It does, because the user was reminded, a little pop-up said this search will be logged and auditable, but they were then still allowed to look the person up.
So the log doesn't prevent the misuse.
It only records it. It creates a paper trail for accountability that may or may not ever be reviewed or acted upon. And this just shows that the technology's capability always exists outside of the governance framework that's designed to limit it.
Which brings us back to their core business model. If they are selling a tool that is so clearly a surveillance enabler, how does Palantir legally and, I guess, morally define itself to avoid that label?
They draw a very distinct, very technical, and often challenged line. Palantir defines itself explicitly as a software platform provider or a data processor.
Not a surveillance company.
Never. They are adamant that they do not conduct surveillance, nor do they sell software for the purposes of unlawful surveillance. The crucial distinction they insist upon is that Palantir does not own or control the data its customers integrate.
So they just provide the sophisticated platform, the
Right.
conduit, to link all these disparate and often incompatible data sources that the client already has.
So the defense is, we didn't collect the data and we don't look at it. We just built the engine that makes the data useful for the state.
It's an attempt to minimize their legal and ethical liability then, by being several steps removed from the actual enforcement actions taken by the government agencies?
Exactly. If the police or an intelligence agency misuse the data, Palantir's argument is that the responsibility lies solely with the client.
And that software comes in two major platforms, right? Gotham and Foundry. How do those two platforms practically differ?
So Gotham is the original product. It's traditionally used for defense, intelligence, and law enforcement analysis. You should think of Gotham as the tool designed for threat modeling, counterterrorism, connecting criminal networks. It's the seeing stone for the security apparatus.
And Foundry.
Foundry, conversely, is aimed at broader business and civilian government use. Things like logistics, supply chains, public health, and large-scale data integration for, say, a hospital system.
Is the governance framework truly different between the two? Or is Foundry just Gotham with, friendlier branding designed to appeal to civil clients like the NHS?
That is the question critics constantly raise. And while Palantir maintains that Foundry is designed with additional features for integrating complex business logic and minimizing data exposure, the underlying core capability,
Which is linking vast, incompatible data sources into a single analytical view.
remains exactly the same. The difference often just comes down to the nature of the data being ingested and the contractual governance that's applied. But their stated goal, regardless of the platform, is to provide the operational tools that allow customers to interact with their own data in ways that minimize risks of civil liberties harms, using those governance safeguards that CARP insisted upon.
Let's pivot to the ambition that's driving all of this. Palantir was founded in 2004, but it spent years operating entirely in secret, avoiding the IPO market. When they finally went public, the financial metrics were astonishing, given their reputation.
It's a quintessential Silicon Valley unicorn story, but one built on strategic power rather than consumer profits. Palantir was consistently one of the highest valued private companies in history,
We're talking valuations over $20 billion.
often exceeding that, yes. Yet their own financial filings showed a net loss of $580 million in 2019, despite achieving revenues of over $740 million that year.
A company valued in the tens of billions, losing $500 million annually. Why did investors tolerate that for so long?
Because the high valuation was based almost entirely on perceived strategic importance and the nature of their contracts. Government contracts are difficult to win, but once you get them, they're incredibly sticky.
Right, they're hard to rip out once they're embedded.
Exactly. They provide long-term, high-margin revenue streams that competitors can't easily break into. Palantir was essentially buying market share in the most exclusive sector, the core digital infrastructure of democratic governments. Investors tolerated the losses because they believed Palantir was achieving a strategic lock-in that would eventually yield immense sustained profitability.
And that strategic focus isn't hidden, it's explicit in their own
Oh,
documents.
absolutely explicit.
Yeah.
Palantir's stated ambition is to become the default operating system across the U.S.
The
government.
default operating system.
And they are actively pursuing that same level of deep infrastructural embedding in the UK government as well. They want to be the invisible, essential connective tissue running the state's most critical operations, from defense to domestic health.
Okay, but the journey toward becoming the government's default operating system well, it hasn't been smooth. It has been riddled with ethical landmines.
To say the least.
Let's start with one of the earliest and, frankly, most shocking. The WikiLeaks scandal that erupted back in 2011. This wasn't just about trying to analyze classified documents. This was about actively undermining perceived political opponents.
This incident exposed a truly worrying mindset. It involved a consortium of 3 private security firms: Palantir Technologies, HBRE Federal, and Barrico Technologies.
And they were pitching a detailed proposal to a law firm.
A law firm that was representing Bank of America, which was reportedly bracing for a major damaging WikiLeaks disclosure at the time.
And the proposal itself outlined a strategy for what you could only describe as corporate espionage and psychological warfare.
That's the most accurate description, yes. The plan wasn't just defensive. It outlined proactive, aggressive measures to undermine WikiLeaks and its supporters. The most aggressive proposed tactic was to submit falsified documents to the site.
So plant disinformation.
Exactly. Plant fake documents, and then, once they were published, coordinate a public exposure of those documents as forgeries. The goal was to sow doubt in the entire WikiLeaks archive, to effectively discredit the organization through a coordinated disinformation campaign.
And they actively targeted journalists, which is, that's truly unprecedented for a tech firm.
Yes. The leaked emails and presentations showed explicit plans to undermine perceived supporters of WikiLeaks, specifically naming reporter Glenn Greenwald and The Guardian's James Ball.
And logic they used was chilling.
Chillingly direct. The internal logic presented in the proposal was, and I'm quoting here, "Without the support of people like Glenn, WikiLeaks would fold." This just reveals a readiness to engage in political and journalistic manipulation far, far outside the scope of merely providing data analytic software.
So what was Palantir's official response when the hacking group Anonymous unearthed and released all these detailed emails?
Palantir eventually apologized, specifically to Greenwald, stating that the actions of its engineers were unacceptable. However, the internal consequences, they tell a different story about the company culture.
How so?
Our sources note that one of the engineers who was centrally involved in drafting these highly aggressive proposals was later promoted to Palantir's head of business operations.
Wow, that sends a powerful, if cynical, message. That aggressive action, even if it's ethically dubious, is ultimately rewarded if it serves the corporate bottom line. It just perfectly illustrates the tension between the public-facing commitment to ethics and the internal culture of results.
It absolutely does.
Hmm.
It suggests that while there may be a line in theory, the institutional bias really leans toward rewarding those who push boundaries aggressively on behalf of the client.
So moving forward a year from that, Palantir then entered the deeply contentious realm of predictive policing with a pilot program in New Orleans. This is a critical case study because it perfectly illustrates Palantir's model of stealth entry into government operations.
This started in 2012. It was a partnership with the New Orleans Police Department, the NOPD, working under Mayor Mitch Landrieu's NOLA for Life anti-violence program. But the key here is how it was structured. It was structured as a philanthropic partnership for nearly 6 years.
Philanthropic, which means it managed to bypass the usual democratic accountability.
Precisely. That philanthropic status was a strategic maneuver. It allowed the entire initiative to bypass the public procurement process, keeping the city's relationship with Palantir almost entirely secret.
And sources indicate that key city council members, even city attorneys, the people who are supposed to govern the police department, they were completely unaware that this highly intrusive predictive policing program was operating in their city.
They had no idea.
And the scope of the data they were permitted to ingest, it sounds like a vacuum cleaner for personal information.
It was immense. Palantir was given free, unfettered access to city criminal records, but also to vast amounts of non-criminal data. And crucially, they utilized a proprietary tool called LexisNexis's Accurant.
What's that?
This service aggregates millions of searchable public records, court filings, licenses, addresses, phone numbers, and social media data that are otherwise incompatible or very difficult to search all at once.
So they weren't just linking police reports, they were linking a person's involvement in a civil lawsuit, their social media activity, their address history, all to train a crime forecasting model. Why is the incorporation of non-criminal data so controversial in a policing contest?
Because it exponentially increases the number of people who fall under police scrutiny without any probable cause or warrant. If the police only use arrest data, they're limited. But if they use Palantir software to map an individual's entire digital and civic footprint, they can essentially build a high-resolution surveillance profile on anyone, regardless of whether they have ever committed a crime.
It dramatically lowers the threshold for who gets targeted for observation.
Absolutely.
So what did the software actually do with this massive linked personal data in New Orleans?
The central methodology was something called social network analysis, or SNA.
Right.
The model was designed to identify specific individuals at high risk of either committing or becoming a victim of gun violence.
And how did it do that?
It did this by drawing connections, visualized in these complex graphs between people, cars, weapons, social media posts, location data from cell phones, and various other indicators scraped from all those disparate databases. Analysts could query the system with just a little bit of data, a partial license plate, a street name, and the system would return an entire mapped association network.
Did the program face any internal ethical challenges inside Palantir while it was still running in secret?
It did, and this is where you see that tension between the product engineers and the ethical oversight team. In 2016, Palantir's own civil liberties engineer, a man named Courtney Bowman, expressed serious concerns internally. The NOPD analyst was pushing Palantir for help generating numeric risk scores.
A heat list.
A heat list approach, exactly. Similar to what the Chicago Police Department was attempting.
And Bowman argued against that numeric scoring.
Vigorously. Bowman warned against the use of quantification, noting that applying these numeric risk score had already exposed the Chicago Police Department to a great deal of public scrutiny. But more importantly, the engineer stressed the moral hazard.
What was the specific concern?
The concern, and this is a quote, was that an opaque scoring algorithm substitutes the veneer of quantitative certainty for more holistic, qualitative judgment and human culpability.
That's a fascinating phrase. Substituting quantitative certainty for human culpability. The score makes the decision look objective, almost scientific, shielding the human analyst or the officer from the moral responsibility of choosing who to target.
It completely shields them. Bowman's point was that their social network analysis model had virtues only because they had kept human analysts in the loop. The move toward a simple heat list score eliminated that human judgment and created an automated mechanism for bias replication.
So ultimately, the New Orleans program ended. What did the city conclude about its effectiveness?
The contract was not renewed by the incoming city administration, primarily due to the intense controversy that exploded once the program's secrecy was revealed.
And the result?
Well, the city did see a temporary drop in murders and gun violence during the first 2 years, but external research that evaluated the overall violence reduction strategy could not confirm that the data-driven interventions were actually the source of that drop-off. In the end, the system's intrusive nature and its secrecy proved damning, and its efficacy remained unproven.
This brings us to the broader topic of predictive policing, which includes systems like Palantir's Gotham, PredPol, HunchLab.
Right, it's a whole category of software. And the core criticism remains that these systems are not objective tools for future crime prevention. They are simply reinforcing existing historical police bias, or what is often referred to as dirty data.
So if the model is fed data gathered by biased policing in the past, it will inevitably predict that the most heavily policed areas are the most criminal areas. It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That is the structural flaw that experts have identified. When an algorithm relies on prior police activity, so arrest records and reported incidents, it's reflecting a police department's resource allocation and historical biases, not the objective reality of criminal activity.
Can you give an example?
Sure. If police departments have historically focused drug arrests around minority neighborhoods, but largely ignore equivalent drug use on, say, college campuses, the resulting arrest data will tell the algorithm in the future to send officers back to those same minority neighborhoods.
And researchers actually proved this hypothesis out in a really important study using simulation.
Yes, the study using Oakland, California arrest data is essential here. Researchers Christian Lum and William Isaac analyzed Predpol's algorithm. They had independently estimated that drug use would be fairly evenly distributed across Oakland's diverse communities.
That's not what the algorithm predicted.
Not at all. When they fed the historical arrest data into the algorithm, they found it would have steered police patrols to black neighborhoods at roughly twice the rate of white neighborhoods, solely based on prior police-reported drug crimes.
So, in effect, the tool was predicting future policing locations, not future crime locations. It was automating historical racial bias.
Precisely. It spat out risk areas based on where police had previously chosen to intervene, not based on where crime actually originated. And this imposed, as the researcher said, real costs on these communities.
Things like increased police scrutiny, which is linked to worsening mental health, more stops, higher opportunities for police violence in already over-policed areas.
Yes. As a result, the technology, which was sold as objective, was criticized for creating a scientific veneer for racism.
And this skepticism has led to the termination of several of these high-profile programs.
Correct. Both the LAPD and the Chicago Police Department scrapped their predictive policing programs after concerns about efficacy and data reliability were raised. Chicago's internal strategic subject list, which gave individuals a risk score, was found to be unreliable by the Inspector General and was overwhelmingly composed of African American men. The technology promises certainty and efficiency, but what it often delivers is just automated bias.
The controversies deepen significantly when we turn to Palantir's long-standing, highly lucrative, and intensely scrutinized relationship with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. This is perhaps the most ethically charged corner of their business.
It absolutely is. Palantir has held critical, long-standing contracts with ICE's investigative arm, Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, and these date all the way back to 2011, spanning multiple administrations.
And critics have called this work the corporate backbone of ICE.
Yes, providing the indispensable technical architecture for large-scale enforcement.
So what are the specific tools they provide that are considered so mission-critical for HSI?
There are two main platforms involved. First, there's ICM, which is the Integrated Case Management System. This is described in government documents as mission-critical for HSI operations.
What does it do?
ICM allows HSI personnel to create an electronic case file, linking every record and every document associated with an investigation from fingerprints and travel history to court filings. It also links records across multiple investigations to draw connections between cases and even manages administrative tasks like timesheets.
So ICM is the centralized repository and the organizational structure for HSI's entire investigative ecosystem.
That's right. Then you have the second platform, which is Falcon. Falcon is the search and analysis tool, essentially the query engine. It allows ICE and DHS personnel to rapidly search, analyze, and visualize existing data within ICM.
And it has a mobile app.
It does. Falcon Mobile, which extends the full search and analysis capabilities directly into the hands of agents in the field.
This is where it gets really interesting. How does Palantir software mechanically enable the controversial enforcement activities we hear about?
Internal documents, a lot of them obtained via Freedom of Information Act requests, provide rare insight into the application. Agents using Falcon Mobile can rapidly search for names, known locations, vehicles, passport information.
Against massive federal databases.
Exactly, including the Enforcement Integrated Database, or EID. An EID is a database that holds biometric and personal information on anyone who's ever been encountered, arrested, detained, or deported by any DHS agency.
That turns agents into walking, interconnected data hubs, capable of running complex background checks instantly in the field.
And it goes further than just lookups. Training documents show how Falcon is used for Blue Force tracking, which is a military term for GPS location tracking. Agents can leverage data streams, like cell phone tower records, to map a person's route and movement hour by hour.
And they can search phones.
Yes. Agents can import and search digital files extracted from confiscated phones using forensic technology like Celebrate, searching the contacts and numbers found against massive federal databases like SEVIS, which holds student visa records, or other enforcement datasets.
And these sophisticated high-speed tools aren't just confined to transnational criminal investigations. They've been tied directly to mass operations that had immense human consequences for civil enforcement.
Absolutely. The documents confirm Palantir technology was utilized in two highly publicized and devastating types of operations. First, the 2017 Smuggling Disruption Initiative, This is a joint operation between HSI and the Deportation Unit Enforcement and Removal Operations, or ERO.
And it specifically targeted parents and caregivers of unaccompanied children.
Yes, leading to hundreds of arrests and severe family harm and separation.
And they were also instrumental in planning mass workplace raids.
They were. For example, the 2019 mass workplace raids in Mississippi relied on this technology for planning and logistical coordination. That resulted in the arrest of nearly 700 people. Amnesty International specifically cited these raids and the targeting of parents as examples of how Palantir's technology facilitates operations, leading to family separations, prolonged detention, and deportations.
Amnesty International concluded that Palantir's technology risks contributing to what are called serious human rights violations. What specifically is their evidence for linking the software to these violations?
Amnesty's analysis is rooted in the outcome. By providing technology that facilitates ICE operations that result in arbitrary detention, denial of due process rights, and the separation of families, including parents and caregivers of unaccompanied children who have asylum claims, Palantir is deemed to be breaching its corporate responsibility to protect human rights.
And this is based on principles from the UN.
The UN guiding principles on business and human rights, yes. The trauma and long-term harm caused by family separation are really central to their argument.
But Palantir has a very carefully crafted defense against this, and it revolves entirely around which specific unit within ICE signed the contract.
Their defense rests entirely on operational semantics. Palantir asserts that they have purposefully declined contracts with ERO, the deportation arm, and CBP, which is Customs and Border Protection.
Why?
Because they claim they share concerns about potential human rights violations and the risks of disproportionate immigration enforcement inside the U.S. They argue their software only supports HSI's primary mission, transnational criminal investigations.
That is a very, very fine line to walk, suggesting they provide the tools to HSI for criminal investigations, and it's HSI's fault if ERO then accesses or uses that information for civil enforcement and deportation. How is that line blurred in practice?
Well, the sources show that the line is routinely erased. While Palantir disputes the scope of use, government documents, specifically DHS privacy impact assessments, state explicitly that ERO uses HSI data that's informed by Palantir's products for civil enforcement cases.
So HSI is the investigative arm.
And ERO is the enforcement and deportation arm. When HSI uses Palantir to map out a target, that intelligence inevitably flows to ERO for action. We saw that with the Smuggling Disruption Initiative, where the two units collaborated using Palantir-enabled data to effect civil arrests and deportations.
So even if Palantir didn't sign the contract directly with ERO, if the architecture is designed to allow seamless internal data sharing within DHS, they are functionally enabling the very operations they claim to morally oppose.
The company's argument is highly technical. It focuses on the contracting unit. But as Amnesty concludes, the high risk of contributing to human rights harms is undeniable, regardless of which internal ICE unit signed the contract, because the data and the resulting intelligence are used system-wide for enforcement.
Palantir's historical work with intelligence and enforcement agencies gives it this shadowy reputation. But in 2020, during the acute phase of the pandemic, the company successfully executed a massive public pivot into a much more palatable area: public health. Let's look at the U.S. response first, with HHS Protect.
This project arose out of a clear governmental failure. For years, the CDC struggled to modernize its data systems. They were relying on over 100 standalone, disease-specific tracking systems that couldn't communicate with each other.
I remember hearing some reporting relied on fax machines.
Literally fax machines.
Oh.
So when COVID-19 hit, the CDC's decentralized and antiquated system struggled disastrously to integrate and securely share critical pandemic information with groups like the White House Coronavirus Task Force.
So Palantir stepped in, bringing their expertise in rapidly stitching together disparate data sets.
Yes. IT experts at HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, they took control of the project, and, using Palantir as a key vendor, they rapidly developed a working platform called HHS Protect in a matter of just 5 days.
5 days.
Palantir helped stitch together 8 pieces of commercial software to create a functional system, which then quickly scaled into a multi-million-dollar data warehouse.
How massive was this aggregation of data?
HHS Protect eventually housed over 200 data sets, containing billions of pieces of information from both public and private sources.
What kind of information?
Real-time data on COVID-19 deaths, symptoms reported by various sources, testing results, supply chain logistics for ventilators and masks, even local ordinances. This was all mined and analyzed using a sophisticated $20 million artificial intelligence system, largely built on Palantir's architecture.
And the purpose was immediate and critical for national security and public safety.
Absolutely critical. The data informed the distribution of scarce treatment drugs and medical supplies. It helped line up patients for vaccine clinical trials, and it was the foundational data source for informing White House recommendations to governors on everything from lockdowns to resource allocation.
But this is where the controversies inherent to Palantir's model just reappeared. The system quickly became mired in politics and secrecy.
Exactly. One of the biggest points of contention was the Trump administration's decision in July 2020 to mandate that hospitals send critical, real-time data like bed occupancy and testing volumes directly to HHS Protect instead of the CDC.
And critics viewed this as a clear political maneuver.
They did. It was designed to sideline CDC scientists and erode public trust in established health institutions.
And the lack of transparency, it mirrored the New Orleans controversy, didn't it?
It did, but on a massive national scale. Transparency advocates criticized the system because much of the core data, the purest, most aggregated form of the pandemic information, remained secret and inaccessible to academic researchers and the public. This hindered any external evaluation of the government's pandemic response and obscured the basis for major policy decisions.
So even though the data was ostensibly collected for the public good, the public couldn't scrutinize the data or the analysis that was being used to generate policy.
Correct. For instance, the White House task force's secret recommendations to governors on city test positivity rates remained confidential. Even state and federal agency employees were reportedly relying on third-party volunteer websites because the granular data sitting in its purest form in HHS Protect just wasn't publicly available for widespread use.
So the centralized system streamlined government operations, but it choked off public scrutiny.
That's a perfect way to put it.
However, officials do insist that they upheld stringent privacy standards despite the massive scale of data aggregation.
They do. Officials familiar with HHS Protect consistently stated that the system contains no personal patient information. So no names, no addresses, no dates of birth were attached to clinical data. They also maintained that their privacy by design principles were fully active.
Granular access controls, logging all user interactions.
Exactly. Every action taken on the system was recorded to prevent misuse, just like in their other products.
This successful entry into U.S. health data really gave Palantir the credibility to pursue its ambitions abroad, most notably in the UK with the National Health Service.
This was arguably Palantir's single greatest strategic victory in the civilian sector. They began working with the NHS during the pandemic on the COVID data store, and they initially offered their services for just a symbolic £1.
A £1 contract.
Before receiving follow-on contracts worth about £60 million. This was their Trojan horse. It allowed them to integrate and prove their value to NHS digital chiefs under crisis conditions.
And that led to the biggest win in 2023, the Federated Data Platform contract.
Yeah. A Palantir-led consortium won the largest IT contract ever awarded by the NHS, a staggering £330 million contract to build the Federated Data Platform, or FTP.
And what's this platform supposed to do?
It's intended to analyze hospital and patient data across various NHS trusts to improve waiting lists, supply chain management, and overall patient flow. It is fundamentally Palantir's Foundry software applied to the UK's most sensitive public resource.
So why did this spark such fierce opposition from privacy campaigners and certain UK politicians?
The concerns were rooted in Palantir's past reputation and just the principle of who should be handling sensitive health data. Critics were deeply worried about the NHS contracting with a company known primarily for its U.S. security work with ICE, the CIA, and its open support for the Israeli military. These affiliations just did not align with the founding principles of a public, universal healthcare service like the NHS.
And the recurring issue of transparency came up again, particularly regarding ethical and legal checks.
Exactly. Serious questions were raised about the required data protection impact assessment, the DTIA. This assessment, which looks at privacy risks, was published after the work had already begun.
So critics suggested it was merely a post hoc justificatory exercise.
Right, not a genuine consultative process intended to manage risk. Furthermore, an international Swiss Army report that evaluated Palantir products concluded it remained unclear whether U.S. intelligence agencies would be able to access data shared with the U.S. company, despite Palantir's official reassurances otherwise.
Beyond security, what is the core ethical objection to the FDP? Does the NHS contract contain the same audit functions and privacy safeguards we saw in the New Orleans pilot?
Palantir maintains that the government retains data ownership and that they are merely a data processor. But the fear is not about technical control, it's about systemic enablement.
What do you mean by that?
Critics fear that embedding Palantir across government departments makes it significantly easier to create a common operating system that links disparate personal data sources, passports, tax codes, health records. And this connectivity facilitates what was known in the UK as the hostile environment data sharing.
Making it easier for other UK government departments like the Home Office to target vulnerable individuals like immigrants using health data.
That is the core dilemma. It's not that Palantir is inherently evil, but that their technology is just too efficient at linking data for whatever purpose the government of the day chooses, including potentially morally questionable ones.
The Labour MP Clive Lewis argued that Palantir's business is effectively death and destruction, making it unsuitable to run the democratic jewel of the post-war period.
Conversely, Palantir defends itself by stating they are merely here to support democratically elected governments in delivering the mandate that they have been elected to deliver, claiming impartiality in policy implementation. But that claimed impartiality facilitates every policy, regardless of its ethical implications.
So now we have to zoom out and look at the broader pattern of influence. Palantir has shown it is incredibly effective at embedding itself politically, starting at the very top of foreign governments.
The political maneuvering in the UK is a prime example. Leaked files revealed a secret, undisclosed meeting in August 2019 between Peter Thiel, then UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and his senior advisor Dominic Cummings.
And this meeting occurred a full year before Palantir won its massive, lucrative NHS contracts.
A full year before, and just as Johnson's government was grappling with all sorts of Brexit data issues.
And the secrecy around this meeting, which was marked private and not disclosed on the government's public log, it raised serious questions about transparency and potential breaches of the ministerial code.
It suggested that Palantir, via Thiel, had a unique and privileged backchannel to the highest levels of government that was invisible to the public and the opposition. The implication, for critics, was clear, that a major, highly valued government contract was being decided outside of the normal procurement or democratic oversight channels.
And the company doesn't just rely on secret meetings. They actively hire their way in by recruiting high-profile political figures.
That is a classic strategy for influence, often called the revolving door. Palantir has hired several influential figures from UK politics and government, including a former Conservative Defence Minister, Leo Doherty, and a former Labour Deputy Leader, Lord Tom Watson.
And critics have openly accused Palantir of buying access and opportunity,
suggesting that such a company would only hire a former minister if it believed it would lead to greater influence, power, or profit within the government departments they are targeting.
Let's turn back to defense and U.S. military engagement, specifically Project Maven. This is where Palantir stepped into a highly public ethical void left by a competing tech giant.
That's right. Project Maven is a Pentagon program that uses artificial intelligence to analyze vast amounts of video feeds captured by unmanned aerial vehicles, drones for surveillance and targeting purposes. The goal is to provide real-time battlefield intelligence, essentially creating an AI-powered command and control system.
Google had previously held the contract.
They did, but they dropped it in 2018 after significant internal employee pushback and ethical concerns about contributing to military violence.
And Palantir, perhaps predictably, took over the contract, showing no hesitation about aligning itself with military objectives.
This fits perfectly with Peter Thiel's muscular nationalism and his philosophy that Silicon Valley has a patriotic duty to support the U.S. military. Thiel had publicly condemned Google's refusal to renew the contract, going so far as calling it treason.
Especially when contrasted with Google's concurrent attempts to develop a censored search engine for China, Project Dragonfly.
For Thiel and Karp, building technology for the U.S. military is a moral and patriotic imperative.
But the concern is that this technology, even if it's only used for surveillance initially, is inherently dual use. It rapidly blurs the line between intelligence gathering and autonomous killing.
That is the core ethical danger. Project Maven stops just short of being a fully autonomous AI weapons system. However, experts point out that training a drone to shoot something works essentially the same way as training it to carry a camera and identify targets.
So without firm and internationally accepted regulations on the ethical use of AI by the military,
critics argue that building this kind of dual-use AI facilitates the rapid and unregulated development of autonomous killing machines.
We've seen the company often distance itself from controversies, claiming employees act in a personal capacity, but that defense became severely strained with the Cambridge Analytica scandal.
The Cambridge Analytica link surfaced in 2018, shortly after the scandal broke. Palantir had to investigate one of its employees who had contacts with CA workers back in 2013 and 2014 regarding the highly controversial data harvesting of 50 million Facebook users.
And Palantir maintained that the employee, Alfredis Kamiliauskas, was acting in an entirely personal capacity.
They did, but the communications that were released during the subsequent investigations suggest that the contact was far from casual.
The contacts were persistent and strategic. Emails showed Kamiliauskas, a Palantir employee in business development, sent an email in May 2014 explicitly discussing replicating the data harvesting methods via a mobile app, like a compare your personality to your friend's app, to entice people to take a test and connect to Facebook.
This wasn't incidental. It was explicitly about leveraging Facebook data harvesting methods to build predictive models.
And a Cambridge Analytica whistleblower further suggested Palantir's involvement went right to the top.
Yes. A CA whistleblower told UK lawmakers that senior Palantir employees had access to the illicitly harvested Facebook data and actively worked on building the sophisticated models CA later used for political targeting. This directly contradicted Palantir's narrative that the involvement was limited to one employee acting outside of his corporate role.
It suggests Palantir's influence and knowledge went beyond one rogue employee and into the core operations of a massive data scandal.
It does.
So the ultimate synthesis of Palantir's work, from ICE targeting to Project Maven, seems to fall under a technical category that sounds straight out of military science fiction.
It does. These sophisticated data tools are part of a broader category known as ISTAR, which stands for Intelligence, Surveillance, Target Acquisition, and Reconnaissance Systems.
What are these systems?
They're essentially massive dragnets, or AI kill chains. They combine immense amounts of public and private data, biometric data, social media information, location data from license plate readers or cell phone records to track, identify, and categorize targets at scale.
When we talk about ISTAR, we're talking about connecting all these seemingly disparate data points: your license plate scan, your social media post, your health record. If Palantir is building the system to link those, how does that create a chilling effect on free speech, even if no illegal search is conducted?
That's the core legal and rights-based objection. Critics argue that ISTAR technology violates fundamental U.S. rights, specifically the First and Fourth Amendments, by establishing vast, invisible surveillance networks that ingest and link location and social media data. They fundamentally limit the things people feel comfortable sharing, discussing, or protesting.
So it chills free expression and association.
It does, because if every data point can be collected, analyzed, and used to generate a risk score, people change their behavior to avoid scrutiny, even if they aren't breaking the law.
And it enables warrantless data seizure.
Exactly, because the data is generally collected from commercial or public sources, rather than requiring a targeted warrant for a specific crime. These systems, including Palantir's documented work for ICE and its use by the IDF, are rapidly proliferating, creating systems of control that we are only just beginning to comprehend, trapping migrants, political dissidents, and even ordinary citizens in their automated net.
It's the normalization of a level of invisible, interconnected tracking that was once reserved only for foreign military operations, now being embedded across domestic civil life.
That is the ultimate conclusion. When Palantir aims to be the default operating system for data across the U.S. government, they are urging the embedding of these ISTAR-adjacent capabilities into every facet of civilian life, whether it's tax, health, or education departments. The risk is that the technical ability to track and link data outpaces any political or legal debate over the consequences, thereby establishing mass surveillance by technical default.
So this deep dive reveals a highly consistent, high-stakes pattern. Palantir is a company that has successfully used highly sophisticated data analysis tools to support critical government missions, whether that's counterterrorism, pandemic logistics, or complex criminal investigation. They are undeniably efficient.
But that efficiency is purchased at the cost of public scrutiny. And it's often achieved by consistently operating in a regulatory space of reduced transparency and high ethical risk. Despite the company's internal philosophical insistence on liberal democracy and privacy safeguards, Palantir's operational history.
From the WikiLeaks disinformation proposal
To enabling mass deportations. It shows that when its software is deployed, the result is an immense, centralized enhancement of state power with minimized public accountability.
So what does this all mean for you, for the citizen who just wants an efficient government that can, say, manage hospital waiting lists better, but who doesn't want to live under an all-seeing eye?
It creates a critical dilemma. The adoption of these systems means undeniably faster, more robust government operations. But that efficiency comes at the cost of public scrutiny and potentially an increased, virtually invisible, state power over individuals, particularly vulnerable populations. The company acts as a technical intermediary, enabling moral and policy decisions that were never subject to public debate, simply because the technology made them possible. Which raises the ultimate question we need to leave you with, right at the intersection of powerful technology and governance. Palantir's consistent defense is that it is merely a data processor, and that democratically elected governments decide how its software is used. But given its stated ambition to be the default operating system for data across every layer of government, and its proven ability to seamlessly embed and link disparate data sources, passports, tax codes, health records, all without public debate, it leads to this question. If Palantir is controlling the systems that enable these moral and policy decisions, who is ultimately governing? The politicians we elect, or the algorithms they buy?
Something to mull over as you encounter the next big tech contract on your local city council agenda. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.